We will move on now to our next session, which is a terrific conversation set up between Research America's President and CEO Mary Woolley and Dr. Larry Tabak, who is acting in the role of NIH Director. So Mary, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, Mary. I'll turn it to you, actually.
Hi, Larry. Well, we all thank you so much for your time with us today. You know, you've been a leader at the NIH for decades now, but just since last December, you've been at the helm. And let me just say that we've all benefited from your steady hand, from your commitment, and your vision of how we're going about confronting the challenges of today. And there are many. So I just want to say a tribute to you. Thank you. Before we get to the challenges of today, I wonder if you could just give us the thumbnail of how you came to be at the NIH, starting back with your work leading the National Institute for Dental and Craniofacial work in diseases.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mary, for the kind words. I think my whole career has sort of been a mix of serendipity and not being afraid to fail. So I started my career in a school of dentistry and the University of Buffalo, and then moved to the University of Rochester, which is a medical school, and eventually became their research dean. When I received a call from Ruth Kirstein, who was sitting in the office that I'm sitting in today. Ruth was the acting director of NIH at the time, and she asked me to join NIH as the director of NIDCR. And it was a little bit of a difficult decision because I enjoyed a medical school environment and needed to decide if I wanted to refocus my intention on dental and oral and craniofacial health again, and decided ultimately to do that, to try and give back to that part of the profession of biomedicine, and stayed in that role for 9 years when Dr. Zerhouni left NIH. Raynard Kington, as you know, became the acting director of NIH, and for reasons that I still am not sure why, Raynard was very kind and asked me to serve as his acting deputy during that hiatus period. And so I agreed to do that. Raynard and I had worked on a number of projects together and worked very well together. And so it was my privilege to serve as the acting deputy during, among other things, the Recovery Act, ERA. And then Dr. Collins, as you know, was named director. Raynard went back to being deputy, and I went back to the Dental Institute, but only for a brief while, because soon thereafter, not quite a year, Raynard took the presidency at Grinnell, and then following a search, Francis invited me to come back to the office of the director to serve as his deputy. And I agreed to do that, looking at history, thinking that would be, sort of a 4 or 5 year period. And, 12 plus years later, here we were.
And you've accomplished a great deal individually and as a team with so many others over time. And your commitment to teamwork really shines through. It's from the heart, I know. They're quite authentic, Larry.
It is a remarkable group of people here who support the organization and the leadership, and we're very, very fortunate to have such talented people really at all levels of the organization.
I agree. So let's turn to some of those challenges du jour, if you will, starting with COVID. What is we are aware, and we're not going to rehearse here all that NIH has done and so well and to the benefit of all. What is the current role that NIH is playing in pandemic preparedness and response? We know that NIAID has put together a plan to ensure that we're ready to hit the ground running in terms of R&D when the next pandemic surfaces. We hope it will not be monkeypox. We did just hear about that. But can you just give us the Cliff Notes version of pandemic preparedness?
Yeah, so thanks. I mean, obviously, NIH plays a central role in this. And unfortunately, epidemics and pandemics are becoming ever more common, likely due to things like climate change and habitat loss. And as a result of those things, there's more human contact with wild animals. So all this recent litany of challenges we faced are not the last. So NIAID, as you know, has published this strategic plan, and it's specifically focused on preparedness, and it has really two features to it. Continuing to work on priority pathogens and accelerating a prototype pathogen approach. So with regard to the priority pathogens, NIAID will continue to both conduct and support research on the pathogens that are well known to keep reemerging. We're heading into the season of flu vaccination, so influenza virus is uppermost in our mind in this category, as well, of course, is coronavirus. But then there's large-scale efforts that they are really undertaking to really figure out the detailed way that these viruses cause disease, with the goal of developing universal influenza and coronavirus vaccines, as well as monoclonal antibodies and other therapies that are more broadly protective. The second component of the plan is where you identify so-called prototype pathogens, viruses within viral families with the potential to cause disease. And that, of course, that knowledge provides a framework for what would be rapid research and product development should an outbreak occur. And just by way of example, the earlier work that NIAID did on SARS-CoV-1 and MERS-CoV, informed the rapid development of the vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 in 2020. And of course, throughout all of this, you've got to do both the basic research, the fundamental research, which is so important, and then then the preclinical studies to characterize both these prototype and priority pathogens. You've got to figure out something about the biology of the virus and their structures. How does the host react to it in terms of their immune response? What does the virus do to evade the immune system? And then, of course, to figure out the relevant animal models for these diseases. All of this feeds into translational and clinical research to develop diagnostics and therapeutics. And here, the whole litany: antivirals, monoclonals, and the broad spectrum approaches, as well as vaccines, are needed. That all helps us shorten timelines between the time the pathogen emerges and the time that you get authorization and approval for new candidate interventions. You need to ensure that you have an epidemiology program in place, a pathogen discovery program in place, and all the infrastructure for the preclinical and clinical effort, as well as technology enhancement. So it really needs to be a very, very comprehensive set of technologies that you can deploy rapidly to deliver safe and effective interventions. And, again, based upon the most recent experience, this, of course, will include second generation mRNA, as well as recombinant virus vaccine and different ways of delivering these things. Skin patches, intranasal delivery, and so forth. And if you think about it, all of these things are disease agnostic. they are really, going to help us to respond to any new pathogen that emerges.
Right,
And of
right.
course, the collaboration has to continue, both within the U.S. government as well as, biopharmaceutical industries, international organizations, and the advocacy groups.
So, Larry, you're really emphasizing, and thank you for that, the importance of a well-functioning ecosystem, if you will. And it's been one of this, many of us have known that and stood for it for years and years, decades and decades, but it really was highlighted during the first parts of the pandemic that we're still coming out of. And the role of public-private partnerships became more and more apparent, I think, to more members of the public who are watching and to those of us in the community. There's been many calls for seizing that kind of model, if you will, that enhanced urgency, that effectively everybody comes together, and applying it to other long time diseases, chronic diseases including. Do you think that's likely and possible? And if so, how can we all, and NIH, beginning with NIH, I would say, assure that that indeed happens so we don't lose the benefit of what we've learned so far?
Yeah, no, I think it's crucially important that we accomplish that. All of the work that has been done thus far has really led to the establishment of new relationships. I think there's now a much better understanding among government entities, the private sector, and of course patient groups, of how each group really functions. And so that better understanding of how we all work to do what we do will bode well for the future. For example, when we did evaluation and prioritization of potential candidate interventions, we had both academic and industry scientists together at the so-called virtual table. That was critically important because without each other's knowledge set, we would not have made the choices, which I think were good choices, but additionally were done rapidly. And the same could be said about deciding what clinical endpoints should be, or preclinical testing data, and so forth. I have to give a big amount of credit to the Foundation for NIH. They were our translators. They understood how both sides function and were able to bring not only that knowledge, but their own deep understanding of this ecosystem, and really helped us enormously. We've got to keep this momentum going. We continue to meet active as a group, meets at least monthly with working groups and the leadership teams. It's allowed us to pivot our areas of focus to some new needs that have come up. For example, variant tracking is now very much a part of what this group is involved with. And I should add that, outside of our efforts in the space of COVID-19, NIH has many partnerships that help us, address unmet medical needs. For example, there's a new Accelerating Medical Partnership Program, AMP, that is launching at the end of this month to address heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. That's about half of all heart failure patients are in that bucket, and it's still very poorly understood. And so what this AMP project, this new AMP project, will focus on is, really combining the expertise of the public and private sector. We also have other partnerships addressing mental health, metabolic health, and a number of other disease states. So this approach where we forge these partnerships is going to become more the norm going forward on a whole range of things. Now, to do this, at a time when everybody is starting to turn to, sort of other obligations, which are, of course, many for everybody, you have to force a carve out to maintain the relationships and engagement. But certainly from our perspective, it's well worth, doing that. The research prioritization, funding, expertise, and so forth. This is a finite resource, and scientists and administrators and others will have to decide, what fraction of their time, is going to be used for this approach. And as you well know, all the other diseases and conditions that we deal with, that people deal with all the time, they've not gone away, and we've got to now re-engage, as we work, towards addressing all of these diseases and conditions. But I think we can do it. I think we've proven it can be done. And the one final thing I'd mention that really came out of this that was great is an increased coordination among government agencies. We've never had better collaboration among NIH, FDA, CDC, and BARDA, for example. And we absolutely need to maintain those going forward. It has really made things so much more efficient, and the value added is incalculable.
All the things you mentioned are indeed important lessons learned. And, this last one, coordination across government agencies, and enhancing that, is a goal that I know we're strongly committed to at Research America, along with the Science and Technology Action Committee that we're closely involved in. And I think we can keep that momentum going. But I want to get back, finally, we're running out of time, to some things that you've mentioned that I think would apply very nicely to a question about what advice you might give to an early career scientist right now, regardless of what field they're in. And I think about what you said right when we started about not being afraid to fail. And that's certainly been characteristic of the response to COVID and to your leadership, I would say, broadly stated. So can you tell us about how do you develop that? And what else might you say to an early career researcher?
Many young people who decide to go into science, are high achievers, and they're used to being, the smartest person in the room. And what I tell young people is, actually, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room to succeed. You just always have to be in a room with smart people. And that really underscores my entire career. I've had the luxury of learning from giants. I've always been able to be in a room with really, really smart people. And what I've learned from observing them and listening to them and working with them is that sometimes hard work and persistence wins out over brilliance. Because biology, nature is the smartest of everybody in the room, and without that willingness to take risks and fail, without that willingness to keep at it, you're never going to overcome the remarkable challenges that nature throws at us. So those would be the elements that I would advise young people.
That's just great. Makes me think about being in the room where it happens. It's not, you're not there all by yourself, right?
Not at all. Not at all.
It takes teamwork, and you're a paragon of teamwork, Larry, as well as an exceptional leader. And it is our great pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, thank you.
Do you have any final words?
Well, just to say, Mary, thank you for your extraordinary leadership and for the amazing work that Research America does on behalf of everybody. Without that advocacy, we could not nearly accomplish all that is possible. And so thank you so very, very much.
Our honor. Don't stop leading. Larry Tabak, the acting director, performing the duties of the director at the National Institutes of Health.
Thanks very much. Bye now.